Hello, and welcome to another day of English 2. I'm your online teacher, Miss Abear. We have been working on an expository research project about the fashion industry. Have conditions improved since the 1800s when the fashion industry really kind of got its start, right? And so today we are going to not be looking as much into additional text. We are going to be looking at the reliability of sources and how do you determine whether a source is reliable. Before we get too involved in today's lesson though, I do want to remind you that this is part of the Common Lit 360 curriculum. While it is my Unit 11, it is Common Lit's Unit 4, and they title it The Fashion Industry, Past to Present. And our research prompt asks, Frances Cabot Lowell had this utopian vision for a factory that would make profits for the owners while also improving the lives of the workers. What was his vision, and to what extent has his vision been realized since its inception? And we are going to be judging the reliability of a source, or we're going to walk through some lessons to help you judge the reliability of a source. So let's look at what we've learned so far. In this unit, we've explored the Lowell system mills and how they affected the women who worked in them. So what are we going to learn? Today, we are going to turn our focus to the modern textile industry and the conditions under which our clothing is made today. Before we dig in, though, I want you to think about, do you think workers in textile mills today are better or worse than during Harriet Robinson's time? Before you just jot your hand up, I would like for you to think about that and then raise your hand and let the teacher in the classroom call on you. Those were some great ideas. Okay, now we are going to kind of shift our focus and let's look at the skill that we are going to be focusing in on. Our research question, I'm going to read this again, I know I just did, but I really want us to hone in on a couple of words in this research question. Frances Cabot Lowell had a utopian vision for a factory that would make profits for the owners while also improving the lives of workers. What was his vision, and to what extent has his vision been realized since its inception? So what I want to look at is this utopian vision. We've talked about what a utopia is. We also want to look at this idea of profits for the owners, but also improving the lives of the workers. So it's not just that the workers have this idea of, I have a good life. Is what is happening in the mills actually improving their lives? So I believe at the beginning of this unit, we did kind of look at how clothing was made prior to the Industrial Revolution. And so you know that each item that a person owned was handmade by someone in their household. Those things were not generally sourced out. Later on in society, you did have people that made clothing, but typically clothing was made by the people in the household that was of the people that were wearing the clothes. So you have to think about what it was and how the textile industry and this idea of Frances Cabot Lowell, his idea and his mills, did they improve the lives of the workers or did they not? And then, does that same philosophy that he had, has that grown? And what about factory workers today? Has that idea of that utopian society kind of gone into today's society, especially when it comes to the textile industry and these clothing manufacturers? So all of that are things that we have to kind of dig into. And so we're going to look at how do we determine whether a source that we choose is reliable. So, but let's first look at the idea of research. What is research? Research is developing a research question, finding reliable sources, reading and taking notes, synthesizing and outlining, and then drafting and revising. Well, you didn't really have to devise any of or develop your own research question. That was already done for you. So in order to complete this research, you have to kind of hit all of these marks. So you should have an idea of what research is. And then you will read the sources and take notes on them. You've done that. You've read and taken notes. Now, we might want to look at some previous resources, right? That's right. So then, once we take notes on all of our sources, then we want to synthesize that information. Synthesize is just a fancy word meaning incorporating that information from your independent research in order to answer that research question. And then lastly, you draft and revise. When you are writing a paper, you might want to make sure that you answer the question with information about both historical and modern mills. So now you have this idea about how to write a research paper, right? So let's now begin thinking about how to tell if a source is reliable. So hopefully your teacher has printed out this handout for you called Judging the Reliability of a Source and Beginning Research. You will notice that part 1 says that you will complete this with a partner. So that's what I'd like for you to do. I would like for you to look at part 1 and answer the question with a partner. What does it mean to be reliable? Great job. All right, now let's move on to part 2. It's time to take some notes. So, and you can see that this is a teacher-led activity. So let's look at this. It says, type or write the criteria for a reliable source that your teacher shares with you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a source can be considered reliable if it has a trustworthy reputation. It seeks to inform readers instead of persuading them. And then it provides information that is relevant to the topic. So when you are determining the reliability of a source, then you want to ask yourself, does it meet this criteria? So now that you've taken some notes, let's talk about what to do when reviewing a source for its reliability. So what makes a source reliable? You want to ask yourself, what is the source's reputation? You want to look for well-known and trusted organizations. So you want to think about well-known traditional news outlets like the New York Times, National Public Radio, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist. You also want to think about government and educational institutions and professional organization websites that end in .gov, .edu, and .org. Also, you want to think about the reason the source was created. So think about those texts and videos that were meant to inform and not persuade. For example, we did read an article that a woman wrote her memoir, right? But she wrote it 50 years after the fact. How reliable is that particular source, right? So was that meant to persuade someone or to inform them? That's up to you to judge. So when you're thinking about the reason a source was created, you want to think about those informational texts and videos that contain facts, data, and or scientific medical studies. You want to think about the about pages on websites that provide additional information about that website. It will tell you what it's about, the purpose of a website. Then you want to think about the texts and videos that do not argue for an opinion or advocate for a political position or a policy, or to sell a product. So if a website is there to sell you a product, well, it might not have the best information for you to use on a source. And then you want to think about how relevant the information is. So you want to think about names, dates, and other details that support that information. Writers and creators who name their sources, people or organizations with expertise and authority for their information. And then you want to think about timely information. All stories and studies have a publication date. Any historical sources should be from or about the appropriate historical period. So now I would like for you to, at the bottom of that page, I believe that's page 2 on your handout, it says in one sentence, summarize what makes a source reliable. So we have worked with a partner, and then I've given you some information, and Common Lit has given you some information, and so now I want you to synthesize that information and come up with one sentence that summarizes what makes a source reliable. Great job. Now it is time to practice, and now you get to work with a partner again. So part 4 asks for you to follow the link in the source, and it's from the LA Times. So I would like for you to explore that with your partner and then answer those 4 questions. Great job. Now with that same partner, don't move yet, I want you guys to brainstorm companies that you can research about modern practices and what those what organizations those companies use. They've already suggested 2. They've suggested H&M and Zara. Great job. Now go back to your seats, and we're going to work independently, and I want you to select a research focus. So I want you to think about all of the things that we've looked at, and I want you to complete the rest of this handout. So that's going to be sections 6 and 7 and 8. So I want you to think about now the more modern industries and how you can find information in order to gather research to answer the research question for this unit. So I'm going to give you time to finish that, and then we'll come back together. Great job. Now that you know some kind of a focus for your research, and you've got some companies that you can start researching, I want you to, for homework, I know we have not had any homework for this entire unit, I want you to start pulling some information about these industries and the current industry, and start gathering some information that you can use to complete your research project. That is all that I have for you today. Until next time, happy learning.